Good evening, Anne. How are you doing this evening?
Good evening. I'm good. And you?
Doing well, thank you.
Anne?
Yeah.
This is Vernell. When you talk about the Hive, what building are you talking about? Because the Hive that I know or think I know is not being worked on. It's rubble. It was demolished after a fire.
Well, I may have the wrong name, so, let's start there. But it's the brick building that sits back in a field off of Route 62, halfway between Chewsville and Old Forge on the east side of 62. And I thought Pat called that the Hive.
The building I knew as a Hive was at the intersection, was at the intersection of Old Forge Road and 62.
Okay.
Okay.
This is south of the intersection, and you can only see it from, if you're going south, generally, you can see it before you even get to the little development on the right-hand side there where there's a house with a greenhouse. You have to look between Beard Spur and that white house down the field to see it very well. I'm gonna grab my Pat Schooley book and see what it's called.
Okay. Because the Hive was an important building dealing with abolition. Also, the Fitzhughs, who ended up in New England, were there. The building that I think I know as called the Hive. And so, every time you've talked about it, I thought, where is it? What do you mean? Okay, well, yeah, look at Pat's book, and I have Pat's book, and then we can figure it out. And it's 7 o'clock, so end of that discussion. Thank you.
Okay.
Telephone number ending in 389. Is that you, Edie?
That's me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Jill.
good evening, everyone. This is Jill. I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started. I think we have everybody here that's coming in tonight. So I'd like to go ahead and call to order in place of the chairperson, Tom Clemens, tonight. I'd like to call to order the meeting of May 5th, 2021. We're going to do roll call. So I believe the way that Tom does this is just go ahead and let you guys announce yourselves so that we can get a roll call count.
Ann Aldrich.
Michael Lush present.
Edie Wall.
Michael Lush.
Sorry.
Vernell Doyle.
Edie Wallace. I don't know if you got me or not.
Okay. I think I got everybody. Thank you very much. So moving on then to the first agenda item will be the meeting minutes of April 7th, 2021. Is there any comments or corrections on the minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I make a motion you approve. This is Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Greg, I'll
Do I have a
second that.
second? Thank you, Greg. Have a first and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you all. So we're going to move on to the other business for the evening, which is the design guidelines for discussion and comment. And we're going to turn it over to Megan for an update on that.
Good evening, everybody. So I did speak briefly with Vernell, so I am going to preface this with if you have any grammatical changes or basic paragraph changes, that kind of thing, I will be following up with you guys with a Word document where we can adjust those types of things. I'd like to keep the discussion tonight to like your content updates or things that you would like to see added content wise or major organizational changes. So with that being said, does anybody want to start the discussion with a particular topic from the design guidelines?
Megan, this is Ann. And first, could you, I compared the old document, but I don't have the history of that. I think I determined it was written in, the old guidelines were written in 2011. And I was wondering if you could update us, one, on, I don't think they were ever implemented. And then two, when you did your draft recently, it looks like you took out a lot of photos and compressed it that way, which was really nice. But you also left out a couple of sections, and I was just wondering if you could give us an overview of how you went about developing the new draft.
Sure. So as far as the actual timing of the document, what you listed is probably approximately the correct date. It seems like they were being worked on for quite some time, but never really got finished. So 2011 might be the last time that they were touched. And those were always in draft format. We have not had design guidelines that I'm aware of. As far as information that was removed or moved around, there were some things that were in there. I'm going to bring up the old document here so that we're all talking about the same thing. I have the new one open. All right. There we go. So some of the information about the HDC and the tax credit information and some of the ordinance information, I took some of that stuff out, knowing that really what I was trying to get down was the architectural styles, the standards, and the design guidelines for those standards, more so than some of this background information, because I'm hoping that we will be able to do ordinance updates after we get these things sorted. So I was trying to get a pared down document that would give the public some guidance for changes that they would like to make to the structures, and then also to work through some of the things that we may want to see in a future document that's more robust, that perhaps we could go through the CLG for funding for. But I did want to at least get some of these traditions and architectural styles down, the standards, and then the design guidelines discussed. And then these other things, I tried to leave some of the application information in, like for our permits and things, but I tried to pare it down a good bit. There was also a lot of information in there that we've actually moved to the website, which I feel like the public has a little bit better searchability on the website for it. And just keeping this document very specific was my goal, so that we don't have too much information in one spot. I wanted to keep it very, very specific, was kind of my thought process behind it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I mean, That's very helpful. And then in the sections that you left in, you also took some things out that I think we probably ought to discuss. And I did create a document where I put some of my questions and comments in that I'll be glad to share with you. It's just, I did it today, so I didn't send it to you.
That's perfect. Like I said, when I first did this, when I first started talking to Jill about working with you guys, so I am very eager to get your all's take on this and also to take any comments that you might have. And I'm perfectly fine adding stuff back in. I was trying to get it as specific as possible, and we can always put stuff back in or even add stuff that wasn't there before as well. I had a few comments in here. I don't know if you guys caught those about some things that I thought from the discussions that you've had that you might want to add in here, even from when I did it originally. So wherever you guys would like to take it discussion wise, if there's a specific spot you want to talk about first, we can do that.
Well, I know I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I do know that, I had some just sort of organization comments, like under the application requirements and the certificate of appropriateness. You list the top bullets, 6 bullets of what building permit applications apply to. And then under the requirements to issue a certificate of appropriateness, it looks like you're only focusing on modifications or new construction. So my suggestion was that either that each one of the points above needs to be addressed in that certificate of appropriateness, so that people understand that if they come in for a demolition permit, they need to really look at that excellent section you have down below. So just a way to address everything that's requires application and provides a link to where the information is.
Okay. A lot of this information from this section is taken from the section in the zoning ordinance too. So I will try to take that comment and work within that zoning ordinance information as well, just to make sure that we're not overstepping based on the ordinance, but we should be able to make that cohesive, I think.
Great. I just think it might help in our future discussions on demolition permits if that's addressed right up front rather than down in the body of or at least because it's listed as a review application requirement and I think requires a certificate of appropriateness or something equivalent.
Yeah, it's kind of the demolition permits do require our review, but they don't necessarily fall in the ordinance right now under this certificate of appropriateness. We do have some information to present to the commissioner soon where we would make sure that that's explicit in the demolition policy, that these things are requested and required for you all to be able to review the permit, that hasn't gone before the commissioners yet. So I will make sure that this is consistent with that one more time, just to make sure for that commissioner presentation that we have coming up. And then make sure, like I said, that it's still following the ordinance. The certificate of appropriateness, I would like to see taken or provided for a demolition permit as well. Because then we would really have the ability to keep a lot better record of what was there if it does happen to get demolished. So yes, I would agree. We'll work toward that.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a section they'd like to bring up for discussion?
A question of clarification, and were you suggesting that the questions in the evaluation process be presented to the applicants, or that those questions become part of the application format?
I was actually up above in the paragraph above the evaluation process. I did have a question that I thought we might want to consider adding to the evaluation process, but the first paragraph is application requirements, building permit applications, blah, blah, blah. And that currently applications that require reviews include
Yes.
new construction, all the way down to the request for tax credits. Although I don't think the HDC's ever dealt, at least in my time, has dealt with that. And then the following paragraph, the Historic District Commission makes prompt and proper decisions to issue a certificate of appropriateness when sufficient information is provided to determine all aspects of a design proposal. And I just, language-wise, my brain doesn't compute from going from that first paragraph to the second paragraph. If they're not tied together, there needs to be some explanation, or that certificate of appropriateness paragraph should cover everything that's up in the application requirements, so that anybody who's looking for a permit review that covers any of those things 6 points above knows what they have to submit. And some of it, like for the demolition permit you could put in a number 5 and say, see section on demolition permit requirements on page blah. But just so that we don't, I guess maybe I just get confused easily, but I was just trying to see how it was flowing and everything was working together.
The problem, and this is Edie, you're having is that demolition permits that are mentioned previous do not actually get a certificate of appropriateness. Is that correct? The two paragraphs don't seem to match up.
Right, but it's just some clarification I think is needed, because demo permits do get a review, and that,
But not a certificate.
and a decision.
You're right.
But so it's just like, I would like to see it a little clearer, that's all, so that people don't say, oh, it's not covered in that second paragraph, I don't have to worry about it.
But you guys still would like to see the same 1 through 4 information.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think we had also talked about in the information that we were planning on taking to the commissioners to eventually have them. And when I talk to customers now, I mentioned to them that you guys would like to see whether or not they have explored the demolition alternatives that are listed on the site and why those are not something that can be done for the site. So that was something else too. So perhaps that would be something where we add it to either its own section, like you had mentioned, in line with whatever policy the commissioners are okay with. But this is something that the demolition part, I agree, it probably does need to be clarified or taken out of this particular section with its own requirements, still maintaining these 1 through 4 here as well.
Yeah, I just think that, both demo permits and tax credits, I think, are covered later on. And maybe it's as simple as in that, behind demolition permits, putting a parens that says C blah, blah, blah. And then clarifying that the certificate of appropriateness only applies to whatever class of things that it applies to.
Sure.
I follow that now.
Sorry, it took me a while to get there.
Okay, does anybody else have any more comments about the application requirement section? Because if not, I think I heard Ann say she did have some evaluation process questions.
The only thing I had under the evaluation process is maybe a question about the historical context of the building is appropriate. And maybe you see that covered in the first one, but I think back to that house in Sharpsburg that we just lost, and the Manor Church Road house that we lost. How to capture that history, and I think you do have that covered in the demolition section.
Okay. But perhaps reiterate it here in some form.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other comments on the evaluation process? If not, I might just go down each header. And if you have specific comments on each heading, then we will get to them there if that's okay. Did anybody have any comments on the ordinary maintenance section?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great.
Number 4, painting or repainting a non-masonry surface. What about painting a masonry surface that is currently there and falling apart or peeling? Because that is a common practice, painting brick.
That's up for the group discussion. I think I just copy and pasted that. So from the previous one.
Because that might be routine maintenance to keep what is there or has been there.
And Vernell, I agree with you not only on that point, but the comment I wrote down is that I think we really need to work on this section to make it much clearer, because I can read this section and say, hey, I can put in replacement windows or I can put in a replacement door. That it doesn't really mesh with the design standards that are later on in the
Styles,
document
right.
or the Secretary of Interior's guidelines.
No, it just says like material and like design, which might be interpreted strangely.
Right.
We do have a section on the website for ordinary maintenance. Would you like me to make this match that a little bit better? Or do you want to send me your specific comments on this section and start there?
I think I would need to look at the website. Yeah.
Okay, because I know you guys have reviewed that in the past. Sorry, Edie, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that if we're going to have it in two places, they ought to match.
Okay.
To avoid confusion.
I think I had originally taken the website information from this, and then you guys had made comments on that. So I will double check and see what does or doesn't match and get that updated as well. Any other content things that you wanted to see in this section other than to make sure we're matching on the website and go from there? Okay. big section. So I will say that as we talked about or alluded to, the demolition portion, we will have some changes to depending on the presentation to the commissioners and how that goes. This is information that we would hope to see for some of the permit information, and then it's also carried over from that original document as well. So does anybody have any questions or things that they'd like to see in this section that we didn't touch on with the discussion about the application process?
Oh,
I have a
Megan,
question with the first paragraph, if I might start there. Am I understanding correctly that an application cannot be denied? Is that what that says? The application cannot be denied unless the State Historic Preservation Officer says, hey, it's not going to happen. So is that right? That's meaning anybody can apply for
That's-
whatever?
For a demolition permit, it can go before the commissioners, but the HDC does not have the ability to deny it unless the State Historic Preservation Office has determined that it has statewide significance.
That's the application. That's not the decision to approve or not. Is that correct?
Megan, were you just saying that the HDC doesn't have jurisdiction to deny unless the State Historic Preservation Officer has made that determination?
Okay, but to deny the application, not an approval or a not to approve.
I think I see where you're taking this, because when we normally review a demolition permit application, you guys do deny it, and then it gets referred to the planning commission, who can then refer it to the county commissioners. Is that where you're going with that?
I just don't understand it. If a person cannot even make an application, if the historic preservation officer has said, hey, it's not going to happen, don't even try to apply. Is that what that statement says?
No.
I think the statement is alluding to the fact that if they applied for a demolition permit and you felt that it had statewide significance, the State Historic Preservation Office could review it and provide comment as to whether it had statewide significance, which would probably result in an additional review. And therefore, if they did go through with that, the state could say, no, that won't be demolished. But you, as the HDC, would not be able to completely deny a permit.
Megan, if I can take this maybe a step farther based on Vernell's comments, and I don't know that this is where she was taking it, but what I'm hearing, I think, is that the next time we get something like the house down in Sharpsburg that was on the National Register, possibly had statewide significance, our job really is to go to the State Historic Preservation Officer and say, look, there's a demolition permit request here. And we're just checking in with you for you to give you a chance to weigh in on it, because we haven't taken that step. We've lost some really important buildings, but we've never given the state an opportunity to even look at it.
Yeah, and this statement lists the state enabling legislation for this. So what I think would be prudent on my part is to contact the SHPO and see what jurisdictions like ours have done in the past, and what their typical review is. If we might be able to incorporate this into that additional demolition review that we had talked about presenting to the commissioners, where we have that little bit of extra time in there to be able to refer it to an agency like this, or Preservation Maryland, or other entities that, you know, work with property owners to retain a structure if it's at all possible. So let me reach out to them and see what their workflow is for this type of review, and see if they are usually, what point in the process they are usually contacted at, and I can take care of that and get back to you guys on that.
That would be fabulous. And I want to go back to the certificate of appropriateness, because if I heard correctly, when we were discussing that application paragraph and the next paragraph on the review for the certificate of appropriateness, demolition permits are supposed to get a certificate of appropriateness. I
So
mean, that's the way it's written right here.
Yeah, we don't now. I think it's the hope that we will have that policy updated to be able
Okay.
to include this in that process.
Okay.
Right now, basically the letter that I've been sending is just that you have reviewed it, and these are the points that you have provided to us as to why it can't be retained. The HDC has accepted that logic, and, you know, in a nutshell, we are all moving forward, and your permit has been reviewed, and no further review is required by the HDC. So that's usually the gist of the letter that I'm sending to people with that. I'd like them to all be like a more standardized letter with very specific, you couldn't do X demolition alternative because, and have everything listed out. But right now we don't get very much information with these. So I'd really like to get these fully into that process where we get the same information for every permit that you guys review, because that's not only fair to you guys in the review process, but it's also fair to the applicant, so they know exactly what they're expected to supply for each permit type.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be included in that process. And I don't know, I'll have to double check that certificate of appropriateness is the correct terminology for the demolition, just to make sure. I think that's what it was referred to in some of the other documents that I was reading, but I will double check and make sure that that can be used across the board for each of the permit types that you guys review.
That was my question, Megan. Did you find this term in other documents that to demolish is appropriate in this particular circumstance? But you know, that kind of like threw me. Like, I don't recall hearing this term before. But yeah, it's appropriate to change. It's appropriate to build. It's appropriate to demolish. That makes sense.
I'll have to double check what the terminology is that was in the original one. I honestly cannot remember if I borrowed that from the original or if that was me reading through some of the supplement ones that I had sent as well.
Some others, okay.
I still feel like this sentence is confusing, because it sounds like the county, we and the planning commission can't deny
Yeah.
demolition unless the SHPO determines it's got statewide significance, and that's not true, is it?
We can't deny a demolition permit unless, if the county commissioners also denied it, then I think that's when the state historic preservation officer would get involved, but I want to double check that workflow. Like, I want to make sure that they don't come into play any sooner than that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, if we all agreed, so the historic district commission denied it, the planning commission denied it, and then the county commissioners also agreed that it should not be demolished, I think the state historic preservation officer would then come in and review at that point and make a determination of whether it had statewide significance. And if it didn't, then at that point in time, I don't think that based on the legislation, that they would be able to deny it any further than that, it would then be able to be demolished. It's just that we would have this record that everyone was against its demolition. I don't think we can stop it. I have to check with the SHPO on that workflow to
Yeah,
see if
because
that's the
Well,
case.
if something only has local significance, it can be demolished, but if it has statewide significance, it can't.
I think that's where that state legislation is going with that. Yes.
Whoa.
Well, shouldn't we then start with does it have statewide significance before we go through all of that?
I know. What's the point?
exactly. The SHPO
Great.
should be considered or contacted
First, yeah.
first, like they are in any other situation, not
Well, I mean,
not last.
that practically nothing is going to be protected if that's true. Because there aren't that many things that have statewide significance.
Yeah,
I think that legislation needs to be rechecked.
Well, I will check with them. But based on this
Yeah.
conversation, I think that's a big point that we want to make sure that that is worded correctly and that we are following the legislation as it's written, but also still advocating for the resources that we have here in the county. So I will check with them and see what that process is and reread through the legislation as well myself and make sure that that is the case. We haven't really
Greg
had
here.
that many of these where I can use my knowledge base on this, but I will double check and see what I can find out for you guys.
So Megan, when you check the legislation, I mean, as long as it's relatively concise and not 300 pages or something, I wonder what it says myself. It seems to me that our entire function would be pretty much negated if there's legislation like that.
Well, we do still have the purpose of reviewing based on our own local guidelines for things like our antietam overlays and things like that that are given through that legislation, and then also the advocacy for the resources that we have. So we still have a big job to play. But
of
definitely
course,
demolition has been one of those things that we're
I was just speaking of with respect to demolition. Our functions are negated by that.
Demolition seems to be the one thing since I've started working with you guys. Demolition seems to be the one thing that we really just need to get clarified for both staff, the public, and you guys as to what exactly we can and can't do, because we don't want to overstep, but we also want to make sure that we're advocating for those resources that can be saved. So definitely this section is important, and I know that we will have changes to this section after I look this part up, and then we will also want to definitely take a close look at it once we get an idea of what the commissioners would like to see us do as well, based on the presentation that will eventually go before them. So sure. We'll definitely keep looking at this section. Does anybody have any other questions outside of that first paragraph?
Megan, this is Anne, and I'm sure it's my background as a federal National Environmental Policy Act compliance officer for a major federal bureau that I looked at that paragraph. Prior to application, the county requires an environmental study to determine any significant adverse effect on the environment. And I'm like, what are we saying here? Can you give me any insights on that paragraph? Because I'm sure I'm reading it in a way that it's not meant to be read. Or at least I hope I am.
I think that is in reference to the building code and making sure that the site is safe before and after demolition. I don't think it's the same type of environmental impact report that you would be looking for, but it's more so based in the building code.
Well, and to add to that, Megan, a couple things that are looked at. Anytime a demolition permit is applied for, it is sent to the Maryland Department of the Environment. They are notified for two essential reasons. One for asbestos, and two for lead paint. So if there's any asbestos or lead paint found in the structures, MDE will require a certain type of remediation to be done, obviously. That has come into play a couple times across the state, where the demolition permits have been halted by Maryland Department of the Environment until such time they can remediate those issues, those environmental issues, before they demolish the home. Because again, we don't want that kind of stuff ending up in landfills that aren't prepared to handle that material. We don't want people who are demolishing the home to be exposed to those materials, so forth and so on. So I think that might play a role in what they're talking about in terms of adverse effects on the environment as well.
That makes sense. A lot more than the way I was reading it.
If I may, back to the first paragraph, I don't know if a date has been set for Tom and Linda Irvin Craig to talk to the county commissioners, but I do not recall in their proposal there is anything about a SHPO override or prevention. So, and I don't know if that has been considered at all in their presentation about what is being asked for with demolition changes. Maybe they should be talked to see if there is any need to say that certain properties were not even, it was mute, they could not be, or moot, they could not be destroyed. Just a question.
I think they were tentatively scheduled for next week, but I don't think the final agenda has been decided yet, but I will let you guys know when it is. And I can check and see. I provided some information to them and Jill did some extra information on top of that for the presentation. And I do not believe that anything I provided had that mentioned, but I can definitely touch base with them and see if they are aware of that and also try to get an answer before their presentation regarding the workflow.
Okay, because there just might be the question about, how does the county have a say over everything in the county? I don't know if it would cross the commissioner's mind or not, but I don't think we've talked about SHPO before with this demolition stuff.
Yeah, I know that the legislation says that you guys have the ability to review them for the entire county based on your criteria that you have. So we can look and see where that SHPO comes in for sure. So we have the demolition planning or listings for prior to demolition. Does anybody have any comments on the information presented under those two sections?
I think it's what we've been talking about. Quite sure.
Okay. All right, and then we have a section, for demolition permit request where we're listing information that we would like to see if the applicant is going to go through with a demolition. We would like to see these things prior to or with the permit application. And I think these things are based on our discussions that you guys have had, where I tried to specifically list out some of the things that I've gotten comments from you guys on in the past. And then adding in things that I've seen other jurisdictions have. So again, when I mentioned that when I talk to customers, I suggest that they provide these things, but I can't say it's required that they provide these things. So just trying to, again, these are things that we would like to see, and having them written in a policy like this or the demolition policy to make sure that they are supported when I request this type of information. Any additions or changes in this area?
Megan, Greg here. When we talk about the
Yes.
photograph type and specifications, the old 4x6 photograph on paper seems like an old thing. We should talk about digital things there too, right? As far as the photography.
We could suggest digital. Yeah, the other thing is that you guys had originally asked me to reach out to MHT about what their guidelines are for submissions to their inventory information. And the color part is really for you guys to review, but they require black and white, and they actually have some specific guidelines. So I guess my question to you guys is, would you rather have them one and done where they do the black and white photos that could potentially be sent to MHT, or would you rather see the 4x6 and or digital color photography from an application? Obviously, we could try to do black and white if they are sent to us digitally. We could potentially do that, but I don't know.
They're not as helpful for review as far as I'm concerned. And I think they're going to be digital regardless, because people do film photography anymore. And I think these are just for the packets, right, that we receive.
Yeah.
Whether it's just going to be printed on printer paper. It's not photo paper or anything.
Right. So I guess my question is if we request them to provide them digitally, with the hope that we would eventually update the historic trust inventory for this site, whether you would want them to provide them in black and white in a format that the trust would accept, or whether you would rather just review them in color for these copies that you receive. It sounds like
Well,
color,
in that case,
color would be better.
Yeah. I mean, if they have digital files, I'm just saying from my own experience of doing inventories, we took digital photos in their color, but we printed them out with the black and white printer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For submission. So as long as they have the digital files, the owner, if they're going to do an MIHP, they have what they need. They just need to be printed.
Okay. So yeah, we could do a digital submission for those. And I can mention that in there.
I have a question about the 7 copies. Are those hard copies, which doesn't make any sense if it's all digital? And is the permit, I don't know what the 7 copies means.
Those would be copies for you, for the HDC. So we could do physical copies, or we could request a digital copy of the information.
You know, when I've done grant requests in the past, they've needed 4 or 5 hard copies. And let me tell you, that is really just an extra 4 or 5 steps to take. And now everything says, send us a digital application, a request. So if it is sent digitally, then it doesn't matter how many copies are needed. They can just be created.
Yes, it's just making the applicant provide those rather than having the staff print them for you and mail them and all that kind of stuff. We would obviously mail them anyway, but print them for you if needed. It's just asking them to provide those copies so that we have one for the file and one for pretty much all of our permits are all digital review now as well. So I agree that digital is probably better, but we did have the 7 copies in there because those would cover giving physical copies to you guys. If you are fine with digital, I'm fine with digital.
No,
We can always print if needed. It's just to save the resource of the department if necessary.
I really appreciate getting the hard copy, but if I were the applicant, I would go, oh, groan.
That's understandable.
Well, and we're applying for demolition, so.
Greg here.
So we could, go ahead.
I think the important part of a submission is actually the digital files that we can get into our system and look at and Zoom with and stuff like this. It needs to be made clear in the statement that the provision of the digital file is important. And maybe we say we want hard copies in addition, printed by the applicant, but they can't just give us the hard copies and no digital file.
I would agree with that. That sounds like the better way to word it, especially considering that we're trying to take away a little bit of burden on the public, but also provide an easy way for us to put it into our system as well, which is reviewed, like I said, digitally now. So yeah, I think that would be, we do well to reword that slightly.
One digital and one hard copy. Sounds, that's what I've been seeing with grant requests these days.
Sure, that gives us enough to put in a paper copy while we are actively reviewing it. And it makes it easier for us to make a copy on our copier as well.
Megan, I'd just like to go back. Everything, just for clarification for me, any demo permit that we see is because it's already listed in the Maryland inventory. So I think you've got everything there that would allow us to send the information into the state to update that file and document the condition and everything of the building before it was demolished. Is that correct?
Yes, trying to make sure that we have everything in there. We also have the ability to review structures over 50 years old. So if it's not on the inventory, but it's older than 50 years old, you guys can still review the demolition permit for that.
But are we doing that?
Yes. When we,
I thought we were
when we
only
get-
reviewing what's on the inventory.
That's all we've seen, I think, in my time.
I'm fairly certain that the ordinance gives you guys the ability to review them if they're over 50 years old. It might be over 50 years old and in the rural village designations that we have, or the historic communities, as I'm calling them now, that we have. But I'm pretty sure that you have the ability to review anything over 50 years old as well. We might not have gotten any recently, but I do get quite a bit of permits that you guys don't necessarily get to, where I'm looking at them just to see if they fall into that category. I haven't gotten any demolition permits, but you should be getting those.
That's really pretty good, because what that does is it covers the lack of having an updated list.
Yes, but unfortunately, we're catching them at the point where they may not be there anymore. I'd like to get them ahead of that point.
Okay.
Megan, one of the other questions I had in reading through this list was, is there a reason, or is it reasonable to request a professional evaluation with the submission, like an engineer or an architect or a restoration specialist, so that we have enough information to really understand the current condition and what are the possibilities. And I'll go back to the building Vernell was talking about before the meeting, the Hive. And Vernell, it's on page 131, I think. That building, by all reasonable person's evaluation, probably would have come in for a demolition permit, and the new owner went the other direction, which is wonderful, and it appears that he's restoring it. So it's just, is there a way that we can get that additional information to provide for our considerations when we're looking at these permit requests?
I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to request it at this stage, at the application stage, or if through the information that is presented with this basic information, whether you would then request the property owner to. So if the property owner did this application and provided all this information, then they said, well, X, Y, and Z is unstable. And they didn't provide a report substantiating that at that point you could request that of them before you make a decision on the permit. But I don't know if it's necessarily going to be appropriate every time for them to provide, an engineer's report on the foundation of the structure. I think it might be more appropriate to say to them, after you have reviewed this basic application, basic, but much more than what we get right now, basic application information, whether it would then go toward that route where you have, an architect or someone, an engineer coming in and supporting the statements that they have made to you. And if they want to provide it up front, we can always, we could suggest that documentation be provided. We could also do that where we suggest that, if you have conditions that prevent the structure from being updated or saved, that you need to provide documentation from a licensed professional that supports that. We could do it that way too. It's up to you guys when you want to request that of them. This is quite a bit more information we're requesting than what we do now. So do you want to add that in for this list, or do you want to wait and see what they provide with this and then follow up with them with the supporting information?
This is Michael. I think if you ask too much of them, it's going to be overwhelming. And then you're going to run into the situation where during the night, the structure will just disappear. And then they'll be in a position where they just have to ask forgiveness rather than permission. So maybe in a later time, you could ask for something like that. That's just my opinion.
So going back to them providing this basic information and then saying, we have our meeting with them involved and they have suggested that, it can't be saved because of these things. At that point, we would request that they provide documentation from a licensed professional that supports that before you would make a final recommendation.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment to that or anything else on this particular section?
Megan, farther down in this demolition section, there were three sections in the previous document. Removal of demolition by neglect, emergency demolitions, and delay of demolition sections that were in the old guidelines. I'm curious what your thoughts were in not carrying those forward.
I wanted to make sure that we kept it to the basics of demolition, because there's room for interpretation with the others. So those are things that we can include in the demolition policy itself. But for this document, I was trying to keep it to facts and concrete things. You're applying for a demolition permit. We're not getting into the things like demolition by neglect that are interpretive, although we know how those go, whether or not something's been demolished by neglect, because we also really don't have any mechanisms currently in place for those to provide anything in addition to what's already listed here. So bringing it up in this document didn't seem appropriate in my thought process. I agree that it's something that we need to address, but we have some mention of it on the website. And I feel like if we have a full demolition policy that we work out and is supported by the commissioners, that's a little more weighty and impactful than having it in here, which is just your nuts and bolts of review.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Any comments on the 2 paragraphs or a couple of paragraphs regarding demolition review or failure to comply and willful disregard?
Mhm.
Okay, now to the fun part. Everybody loved reading this section. So whoever contributed to this before, thank you. But we have the short history of Washington County listed here. Did anybody have any comments on this section about the content or any expansion or anything like that?
Well, I think that the first land patents in the county occurred before 1834. But that's, it would be more
Okay.
like it took another 100 years.
Okay,
Because this part of Maryland was opened around 1730, 1732 or something like that.
okay. All right. So you're thinking, okay, I'll update that. I can update that. Anything else in this first blurb about the history? Okay. Architectural styles of Washington County. And now a lot of this I just copied from the original document and enjoyed reading. So does anybody have any comments on the architectural styles beginning blurb? Great. Okay, so the first section is vernacular forms. And I guess basically what I would want to know is whether you guys were still okay with the way that this is broken down, where we have, you know, the style, the character defining elements, and the dates, whether that organization is still good. And then let me know if you have any comments on the content as well for those character defining elements or the blurb. Is everybody still okay with the way it's organized? Hearing no comments, I'm going to assume that the organization is okay. All right. So did anybody have any comments on the blurb or character defining elements of vernacular? Great. Okay. Georgian, Did anybody have any comments on the blurb or character defining elements of Georgian? See, I knew you all wrote this really well the first time, so. All right, federal
I
style.
did see it. I did see
Okay.
a typo there
Okay,
where it says Georgia instead of Georgian. Just watch out for that near the beginning.
oh, I see it. Okay. All right, I will note that. And then for the federal style, it's hard to argue with these. Greek revival. I actually just visited Plum Grove with my husband the other day and took some new pictures. So I can include some different angles of Plum Grove if needed.
Megan, if you haven't been there at the beginning of June when the roses bloom,
Oh, is that another good time to go?
oh yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Their heirloom roses are wonderful.
Well, I'm planning on taking my kids up to Hancock to the rail trail. So I think maybe we'll swing back by there when we go through. So that's good to know. No comments on Greek revival? Okay. Italianate. Oh, we're gonna fly through these.
Is that really described as Italianate? That
The
William
structure that's listed-
Hagerman. Yeah.
That's the one that was chosen for the previous document. I'm open if you have a better example.
I don't know. I know Paula and I wrote that NR, and I just don't recall at all what we said, but it's not even remotely classic Italianate, but I guess the point is that things are so vernacular in this county that, you know, it's maybe it's a good example of vernacular Italianate.
Well, I was trying to think that there's probably some structures in Hagerstown that would be more traditional Italianate, and maybe even in Williamsport. Does anybody have any that they can think of that are out in the county jurisdiction? I'm open to go take pictures. I love going out and driving around to find these.
And Megan, Greg here, I can't think of anything right off, but this is absolutely not an Italianate picture, in my opinion.
Okay.
But there's got to be a better example somewhere in our county than this.
Okay. I know that I tried to mark down the listed architectural styles when I was going through the initial historic point review when I first started here with the county. When people like Edie actually go out and survey these and provide all that nice detailed information. I tried to put some of that information in. So I will look and see if I put notes on any that were listed specifically as Italianate and see if I can find a better example for that one.
I think there might be a couple of them on that street, like Potomac Street with the big houses in the middle of the city, but that's the city, not the county.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be a lot in the, I say urban or town areas, but I can't think of any in the county that I've seen, but obviously I'm not as familiar with them as some of you guys might be. So I will look and see if I took any notes where I could find a better example of one of these. If we have to do one in an urban area, I think we would do better to provide an accurate example than necessarily stay within our jurisdiction. I think as long as it's in Washington County, it's still a good example.
Oh, I'll certainly vote for that. It would be better to have a city of Hagerstown than nothing. And I'm almost certain there's something there in the city.
Okay. Noted. We will look for a better example of Italianate then. Okay. Second Empire. I think, does anybody have any comments on the Second Empire section?
Now that example I like a lot better.
Okay. Oops, I skipped ahead there. I hit the wrong button. Okay. Queen Anne or other Victorian styles. Great. Colonial revival. Any comments on that one? Okay. Classical revival. I actually got a new picture of this building and it doesn't look that different. I was surprised. The cars will be different, but I can provide a color picture for this building.
Yeah, the color pictures definitely are, I think, preferable.
Sure, and I can go get color pictures for the final for some of these. But this particular building I used for the architectural term of the week for Preservation Month for coins. So I went and took a new picture of it. All right, 20th century, which we have covering 1900 through 1950. We have a couple different styles in here. So does anybody have any comments on the paragraphs regarding 20th century? Okay.
Got a simple flood plan there, maybe. Bit of a simple floor plan.
I'm sorry, you broke up. What'd you say?
Under Foursquare, you've got simple flood plan.
Got it. All right. Simple floor plan. We can update that. All right. So Foursquare. Did anybody have any comments under Foursquare?
Just a question.
Sure.
Is this where the Sears houses come in?
I'm not sure. I guess we could include.
Because that was a pretty neat thing that happened. You know, you order your house from Sears.
Yeah, I guess we could include that in here if you feel like we have a good number of examples of those.
Well, I know of only
I
one.
feel like, yeah, I feel like maybe bungalow would be
Oh, bungalows. Mm.
a better inclusion, and those are often what the Sears, the little Sears and Penny's houses were.
Okay, so maybe including bungalow as a architectural style in this era.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, there's tons of them in the county.
No, sure,
There's some
that's
great ones just on the south edge of Hagerstown, 165.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely want to get those. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
Second, Megan, if you want, that picture that you have there, Village Mill Drive, I really thought you almost took a picture of my house.
I was gonna say, I looked at the address on that when I was going through this, so we could,
That's exactly the style of the house I'm in right now, so.
Jill will donate her photo. We'll have her get a picture on the way home.
There you go.
So Megan here, were you actually going to put in an image of 1950 style ranch houses?
So I found some good examples that were already listed on the inventory along Jefferson Boulevard. Does that sound like that might?
It does. By Jefferson Boulevard, you mean 64, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I live in Smithsburg. There's a lovely neighborhood of post-war little ranch houses for the post-war boom right there off 64. I don't know if that's exactly what you're thinking of.
Yeah, so apparently MHT, I assume there was a highway project along there. They did a survey along the Jefferson Boulevard corridor, and I specifically noted 963 Jefferson Boulevard.
Yeah, I would totally agree. That's where to find them because I go back and forth on that road all the time, and there's plenty. There's a lot of them that are junk, but there's some that are clearly just perfect examples of what somebody's ideal was in 1949.
So that particular one I have on my list to go get pictures of. I was waiting till we discussed this to go get more pictures. I like I said, I took some out at Hancock because I was out there for our comprehensive plan to get some pictures, but I do have plans to go out and get more pictures because I also need to get some pictures down at Tolson's, even though Edie might be able to give those. I still want to visit it. So so I have that 963 Jefferson Boulevard or, that general area as a place to get a picture. Because I think I might actually be able to get a whole streetscape there that is just ranch style. but I'm going to try that area. I know that that kind of Robinwood area and Jefferson Boulevard area would be ripe with different structure types, but that particular section of Jefferson Boulevard had already been inventoried. And I was trying to
I
keep
think-
with ones that had inventory numbers for these examples.
And I was going to say Robinwood, but I think that's probably in the city.
No, Robinwood, we could, I mean, that's in the county. It was just trying to find one that's already listed on the inventory.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
people could go read the documentation that's included. But if we really feel like there's one that's not on the inventory that would be a better example, we could always explore that. I was just trying to keep them to the inventory for this particular.
Your idea is a good one.
And then I have on my notes whether or not you guys wanted to look at any other what we consider would modern styles, and I assume we are going to stick with bungalow and add that one. But other styles like split levels, contemporary shed style, minimal traditional, anything else that you want to add that you really feel like we have a lot of examples of in the county, other than bungalow. I have that one noted.
I mean, they all, anything up to what, 71 now is eligible.
Yeah, and I mean, like we had talked about this kind of, we have it cutting off at 1950 here, which is why I was kind of like, well, we really should go to at least 70 for this. So if there's any other styles that you guys want to add, think about it and let me know. And then I will use my little architectural Bible here to pick out the defining characteristics to run by you guys on a future draft.
Do we have any mid-century modern houses or buildings?
That aren't commercial?
Yeah, Mapleville Road, there's one. There's one on the dual highway too, but there's one on Mapleville Road. It's not pretty.
I've never heard anything say it had to be pretty.
I know. I'm just thinking, you have split level in here, which technically would be, age appropriate, but they're really working on trying to decide how to determine eligibility of these more modern buildings, that are a dime a dozen, basically, because not every single one is going to be eligible. It's going to have something extra about it to make it worthy. I know that sounds terrible, but
well, there's the other characteristics too. It's not just, I mean, we're listing this as part of the architectural styles, but it would be nice to have those architectural styles defined in case it also falls under one of the other criteria too, just as a way to support it even further.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good. Those are going to be more like eligible as a group, as a development,
Right, as a community.
I mean, that's what we're doing down in Montgomery County, is that it's not like the individual houses are significant, but the development as a whole would be the significance.
And I think I'm trying to remember if we touched on that in here, if that was one of my comments. So we can circle back to that idea of the landscapes, because I think Anne had talked about that too. But did anybody have any others that they can think of off the top of their head? Okay. For commercial buildings, did anybody have any comments on 1890 to 1930 commercial buildings and characteristics? Oh, I had a comment here that Edie had mentioned capturing post 1930 commercial structures. Did the HDC want to detail any commercial characteristics post 1930 in this section of the document?
There's I don't think I see the mention of Carrera glass, but I know that would be.
Mhm.
So do you want to try to do a
Yeah.
commercial building
Mhm.
section post 1930 and have a blurb about that with some characteristics that you guys would support?
That's probably a good idea. We just went on the architectural tour with Paula last weekend,
Mhm.
downtown Hagerstown. And those, of course, commercial buildings, people lived in them also. But yes, that's another characteristic. And commercial buildings might very well come under the concern of the Historic District Commission. If they're in an incorporated town, then that's not what we need to think about, but there might still be some that would be of interest. And if you haven't gone on that tour with Paula, if it's offered again, I think you would enjoy it immensely.
Great, I'll take a note of that.
And also Paula and Edie would know too, if there were examples that you would be looking for in particular. I'm thinking of the Spanish colonial revival, which is just a mishmash of all kinds of things, it seems. But you also did mention in this document that none of these styles are pristine. There's a mix, there's a personal element that's put in, but there are dominant characteristics that I think that's what you're pointing out here.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I've been contacted recently regarding like a historic gas station type properties as well. Which,
Yeah, I was just thinking that we would be more likely to be looking at those than anything in the county, really, as
okay,
far as commercial buildings. Well,
okay,
but then there's a whole litany of different styles of gas stations.
Ooh,
If you want to get into that, it's very exciting.
I do, but maybe not right at this point.
No, definitely.
So what I'm hearing then is to go ahead and research doing an additional section post 1930 and potentially call out some specific commercial uses like gas stations or something like that if we can find some documentation to support that and some structures to support it. Sound good?
yes, one of the
Did we lose her?
Yeah, I think you muted yourself for now.
yes, I did.
What were you mentioning? Are you still muted for now?
Yes, thank you. Now I'm okay. Now, I was just mentioning Art Deco, if that is something
okay.
that would be in residential rather than commercial. But that was a big deal too. A changing thing that moved
Okay.
styles.
No, I think it's worth looking into to see what examples we have, and whether or not we can definitely look at what examples we have and then see which section you guys think that one would fall under. Sure.
Okay.
There's nothing that's saying we can't put it under both. Okay, I think that the last section here is ecclesiastical architecture. And obviously one of my biggest comments is to get an updated picture of Tolson's Chapel because that's changed quite a bit. But
I can send you something, Megan.
other than that, did anybody have any comments on ecclesiastical that they wanted updated on that? Because we don't really have very many, but there's no characteristics really listed. There's just examples. So I don't know if you guys are okay with that or if you wanted to elaborate any more on it.
Hmm.
Food for thought. I will let you guys think about that one. I'm going to get an updated picture and then feel free to, because obviously we're going to have to go through another draft of this. So feel free to think about that one and let me know if you want to break it down further, if you want more examples, how you'd like to handle that section. Because there are going to be several examples of these that would fall under review.
I was going to say, Megan, it seems to me, and it may be they're all in incorporated towns, but there were churches that were built before 1849. You know, the Zion Reformed Church in Hagerstown. Some of the, I don't know when the Manor Church was built, but some of those Germanic churches out in the more rural areas.
Okay, so going to grab some earlier examples. Is that what you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think so. I can't see the
Okay.
date on, what's the date on the Dunker Church?
52.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I would even include that church, even though it's beautiful. It's in a national park. I think it would be more useful to use maybe the Manor Church or I mean there's these little churches all over the county.
Yeah.
I think that's an important category. In Roarsville, there's an old Lutheran church. People are buying these churches and turning them into residences.
Yeah.
So I think it's an important chapter or section.
Okay. So we want to get
And
a wider
Sharpsburg
breadth of
has
examples and go ahead, Edie.
Lutheran Church in Sharpsburg is 1890s, so that would get you a
Okay.
little later.
Okay.
What about the Beard Church there, the Lutheran one by the Beard Spur on Old Fort?
That's right. Yeah, it's still an active church, but who knows that it might someday come under concern, or they might even ask for some kind of reconstruction permits. So yeah, this is an important section.
We've also got some churches that have quite a bit of property associated with them, where we've seen them come in to do updates that might affect the integrity of the property as well. So it would be nice to define the characteristics and the area of influence for some of these as well.
And also, and this just happened near Roarsville, the Manor Church, is it Manor Church out there? Concern with the reuse of that building and the associated cemetery. So this is really important.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely work on expanding this then. I'll keep this open, try to grab a couple more examples, and then if you guys come up with additional documentation that you'd like to see, please feel free to forward that as part of your comments and things.
So, have you considered a section on agricultural buildings, since we're an agricultural county?
So that's kind of
It's
tricky.
a very niche one.
So as part of a farm complex, we could list the characteristics of barns and things like that. I think that's well within. The ordinance does specifically say that for new construction, we can't really comment on ag buildings, but we could for sure list out some characteristics of some of like bank barns and things like that that are part of the agricultural complex, because those are called out in the inventory sheets.
Mm,
So instead of just being, the vernacular residential structure, you may also want to point out some of the barns and things that you want to go as far as like milking parlors and things like that, or do you want to just go with your traditional like hay barn type facilities?
Well, I would certainly include the bank barns.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and it's tempting to mention things like the out kitchen and spring house, just because those are they're such important buildings,
Mm-hmm.
in a agricultural complex landscape.
Would it be worthwhile to just call out common accessory structures that we have in the county, like summer kitchens and those, agricultural support things like our bank barns, and call that a section?
Yeah, wasn't there a section like
thinking-
that in the original design guidelines?
Let me look here. There's, under the design guidelines, there were, but not called out in the architectural styles. So the design guidelines, it does mention accessory buildings for suggestions for retaining those. And then construction of new accessory buildings. But there's no listing of them under the traditions and architectural styles section, which is kind of where we're talking about adding in a portion of that. So I really feel like that is a great suggestion, because if we have that in the design guidelines, we should probably have some supporting documentation and examples in the county.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see it there because it lends a little weight to their existence.
Sure.
And, maybe this is providing a little education for people. And if they see that the barn they have is a style, an identifiable style, and what it was used for, what its history might hold, they might be a little more interested. I don't know.
Okay.
Possibly.
Well, I will try to gather the ones that I know of, and I'm sure you guys will be able to give me extra examples of things. And we'll get back together on accessory structures then.
And Megan, I'm wondering with accessory structures, if that's where stone walls and fences might be, or if they're part of the environment. Because if somebody says, that wall there, I'm going to knock that down. I don't like to look at it. And those are very important features of the style of this county, all the stone that was hauled up and put in rows that became walls and then became part of buildings. I don't know how, if that's making it way too broad.
Well, we do have a section in the design guidelines that covers that kind of topic with the stone walls and things, and thinking about it from the landscape perspective.
Landscaping, yes.
So I think the stone walls would be a good example, because we do have, I think it's Dam 4 Road, but don't quote me on that. There's one of the roads down near Downsville area where we have the stone walls specifically listed as an inventoried structure. So that could be a good potential example of, things that we would like to see retained. They're not necessarily ones that you would get comment for, but it's good to have the documentation there for the public to be able to reference, which is ultimately what this document is for. You wouldn't necessarily have review authority on those except for in some very rare circumstances. So
Megan, Greg here.
go ahead.
I unfortunately am going to have to check out. I'm going to have to vacate the space I'm in, but I'm happy to see this has become a fairly gratifying discussion on these subjects. And I'm happy with the direction it's going.
Please, thank you for joining us, and please do forward any comments that you have outside of what we've discussed here. Feel free to
I
send them
shall.
along. Thank
And
you.
you all have a good evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, Greg.
Bye, Greg.
So Megan, in one of these discussions, Gary Rohr had mentioned something that is a distinction between stone walls and stone fences.
Mm-hmm.
They are different things. And I
Yes.
don't know where they might fit into any of these categories, but they definitely are a defining aspect of Washington County.
Yes. So I remember that discussion. I think that the ones that are mentioned here are both. I think I listed both after he said that. I don't know that I put any defining characteristics because again, they're not up here. They're in those design guidelines. So we could bring that information up here where he assists in giving me the characteristics that make them different for the public to be able to see that.
Well, yeah, some are dry laid and some are mortared. So there is a difference, definitely.
Okay. All right. So we're going to add potentially an accessory structure section here to support those guidelines that we have later on. Any other additions to these architectural styles? Okay. I think everybody's probably aware that these standards that are listed here are pretty much just copy and pasted from the Department of Interior. Did anybody have any comments on these standard sections?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Level of appropriate choosing an appropriate treatment. Again, these are from the standards. You can see the quotations there. Did anybody have any organizational comments or comments on the content on these? Okay. And you guys already use these when you're looking at things. It's just directly stating them in here for the public to be aware of that. Standards for preservation. Did anybody have any comments on those? Okay. We did rehab and also restoration. Again, straight from Department of Interior documents. Did anybody have anything organization comment wise on those? Okay. Oh, and reconstruction. I always miss that one at the end. Is everybody okay to continue discussing the guidelines portion, or would you guys like to provide comments on these and leave discussion for the next meeting? I know we're a little bit over on our normal time. We can definitely continue this if you'd like. We've had some good discussion here. What's the group's thoughts?
Megan, this is Ann. I would propose that this is a great breaking point because
That's what I was thinking
we're gonna
too.
get into more discussion when we get into the guidelines.
Yes, I was thinking this is probably a really good spot to stop with this particular thing, and then I can fly through the couple staff updates I have. Did anybody have any objections to that?
No objection.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate you guys sticking with me on this and giving such good feedback there on that last section. So thank you. If that's the case, Jill, if you're okay with it, I'm gonna.
Yep, totally
Yeah.
okay with it.
I'm gonna
Heading
move on.
on.
Okay, so let me switch my screen over here. So under other business tonight, we have just a brief staff report. I just wanted to give you guys an update on some of the permits that have come before that were routed to the HDC, but didn't necessarily need to be reviewed by you based on where they were, that kind of thing. So we looked at a permit on Millbrook Road where they are revising a window opening to make it into a door for a porch patio area. That was not in an area where we had comment on exterior modifications. It's right outside of the rural village, and we didn't have any comment on that. So I passed on that one. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the property at 20702 Old Forge Road, the Schooley property. They are constructing a storage building.
Yeah,
That particular permit is outside of the HP overlay, the MHG, and I'm sure Miss Schooley was aware of all of those things. So I just passed on that review. You guys didn't need to see that since it's well outside of the areas of influence of the historic structure. We had a permit for Polecat Hollow. It was in a reviewable area, but the structure was built in 2008, so it's not something that you guys needed to review. It was also just a rear deck. So we passed on that. And we had similar permit review on Porterstown Road. It was a pool to the rear of the dwelling, and that actually didn't need to be reviewed by you guys. And then Pickwick, which is in the Lakeside Mobile Home Village. That particular area, it used to have a historic resource there, and it was flagged when we had a demo permit come in. That mobile home was significantly damaged by a car accident. Obviously, the mobile home did not need to be reviewed, and that type of review when it's affected the structure's integrity didn't need to come before you guys anyway. So that one I just passed on. So those are the few permits that we've gotten. Thankfully, no demolition permits or significant projects to review this time, but still getting permits for review. I just sometimes when you guys don't have permits for review, I don't want you to think that you guys aren't getting stuff forwarded to you. They're just ones that aren't really ones that need to be reviewed by you guys per se. Does anybody have any questions on those? Perfect. And then one final update for National Preservation Month. I have talked to a few of you about this, but we have posts going up every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. based on that draft document that I forwarded to you guys for review. I didn't get any significant feedback on that, so I went ahead with what I had. If you were waiting for today to give me any comments, please do let me know either after the meeting or right here to let me know if any comments that you have for that. Basically, the posts start with a Monday topic followed by a Wednesday follow-up, and then Thursdays are that architectural term of the week where I did go out and get some pictures for that. So that's hopefully going to be the ones that engage people are the ones with the pictures. And then for the 1 week, we have Windows Sash as the term. And I tried to tie in Anne's window workshop, which is pretty much exactly 1 month away from that date. So there's an extra post that day promoting that window workshop. Did anybody have any questions about National Preservation Month posts?
Megan, this is Ann. I just want to thank you for all the effort you're putting into it. I think it's great, and I know the trust will do what it can to spread the word that you're doing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. I appreciate that. I hope that it'll at least get a little bit of interest from the public. I think the ones with the pictures of places around the county will probably be the ones that engage the most. At least I'm hoping. And with that, that's all I had for the staff report. So I'll let Jill take it back.
Perfect. So yeah, you can see Megan's been super busy trying to put us in a good position to continue to promote historic preservation, and we're excited about that. Just as a reminder, next month what we will do because Tom has asked us that he would, he's going to move himself out of the Historic District Commission. I think he's got about a million more commitments out there, and he just feels it's time. What we'll do next month is an election of officers, and then I will try to have Deb look at some applications that we've received in the past, and maybe we can look at replacing Tom at some point here in the future. Not looking forward to that day, but I understand we can't continue to hog all of his knowledge. He's got a lot more going on and a lot more to give to the community. So so that'll be next month, and we'll get that scheduled and get that handled then, and hopefully get him replaced. So with that, just a reminder that our next upcoming meeting will be Wednesday, June 2nd, 7 p.m. As an update, I wanted to let you know that the county administrator has put out protocols so that county staff will start returning to our workplaces beginning on May 17th. So we as staff will start returning to normal. I did inquire about outside agencies, boards, and commissions starting up in-person meetings again. The answer that I got from the county administrator is that we are not prepared for that yet. We want to wait and see how the transition with staff goes, and we also kind of want our numbers, our positivity rates to drop a little more, and we'd like to see the vaccination rates go up before we start bringing in the general public into the community, the county facilities. So for now, just be prepared. We're going to continue with our virtual meetings, and cross your fingers, tell your friends to go get vaccinated, and be safe out there. And hopefully sometime in the near future, we'll be able to see each other once again. So that's all I have for the evening. With that, I would take a motion for adjournment.
Before we do that, I have a question. Jill, do you
Yes.
have a ballot for officers for the election next month?
No, typically the way the election of officers go is that you nominate at the meeting. You guys can have offline conversations about that if you'd like to. But typically we just take nominations at the meeting. We would be taking nominations for a chair and a vice chair, so that if in the future the chairperson would need to miss a meeting, we would have somebody to pick up the chairmanship. So we just take those at the regular meeting. We don't actually do ballots or anything like that.
Okay, that was just, will Tom be at the next meeting? Do you know?
It is my understanding he will be, yes.
Okay, great.
It would be my intention to make sure all of the members are present for the election of officers. So if somebody couldn't make it, we'll reschedule it.
Whoa.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts for the good of the order? Okay. Hearing none, I'll take a motion then for adjournment.
I make a motion, we adjourn. This is Michael.
Thank you.
I'll second it, Ann.
Thank you, Anne. I've got a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, each and every one of you again for having fantastic comments for Megan. We really appreciate the feedback. It makes it feel much more like a validating process for us to know that we have people interested. So thank you again, and I hope you all stay safe and have a great evening.
You too. Thanks.
Aye.
Bye.
Megan, good night.